Dear friends, in this conference, we continue our reflection on the symbolic language of the book of Revelation, because understanding it correctly is a real key to understanding the book. We now turn to the question of how to interpret the symbols correctly. Unfortunately, fanciful interpretations of the apocalypse are legion. And so, what objective criteria can we adopt? I think that we need to distinguish three different levels for interpreting the symbols of the Revelation. The first level for interpretation is the cultural context in which the book was written, and in which the symbols have a meaning drawn from human experience that is easy to perceive. This meaning can often be universal, but that is not always the case. The symbol of the lamb, for example, universally expresses gentleness, meekness, innocence, while that of the lion expresses strength and royalty. The lion as king of the animals, but in a large number of cultures, but not in all cultures. In Far Eastern cultures, for example, the king of animals is not the lion, but the dragon. What is more, in the West, the dragon is always a negative symbol. It is seen as dangerous, ferocious, and evil. Just think of the dragons in many European legends, such as Fafner in Richard Wagner's opera Siegfried, or Smaug in The Desolation of Smaug, the second part of The Hobbit of Tolkien. So we have to take into account the historical context. In Far Eastern cultures, the situation is different from the case of Western cultures. In Far Eastern cultures, there are good dragons and bad dragons. But the Bible was written in a culture in which the dragon is always a negative symbol. Another interesting case is that of the white collar, symbol of victory and celebration in Western cultures, but symbol of mourning in Far Eastern cultures. So these two examples show that we need to take into account the Jewish Mediterranean culture in which the apocalypse was written. Otherwise, we run the risk of making misinterpretations. Let us turn to the second level of interpretation. The second level is the Bible as a whole. For the Christian reader, the Bible is a book unified by its inspiration, which comes from the Holy Spirit, its principal author. The non-Christian reader, on the other hand, can at least recognize that the human author of the book of Revelation was a Jew rooted in the Old Testament, to which he makes constant reference. Some of the symbols in the book of Revelation, when placed and interpreted within the Bible as a whole, immediately evoke other passages in the Bible. For example, the symbol of the lamb immediately evokes the Paschal lamb or Passover lamb, Exodus chapter 12, the sacrificial lamb of the Mosaic law, and the suffering servant of Isaiah 53 led to the slaughter as a gentle lamb. The woman clothed in the sun in chapter 12 refers simultaneously to the woman facing the serpent in Genesis 3, to the mother of Emmanuel, Isaiah chapter 7, and to the bride of the Song of Songs, Psalm chapter 6, verse 10. In this way, a symbol refers simultaneously to different passages in the Bible, thus forming a network of allusions that resonate with each other. Now, of course, to perceive these allusions requires a good familiarity with the Old Testament, which unfortunately is not often the case among Christian readers. Good Bibles indicate some of these allusions in footnotes or in the margins of the text, but they cannot mention all of them. Finally, the third level for interpretation is the historical and geographical context of the Greco-Roman world of John's time, in which certain images have particular echoes. In historical terms, for example, the image of the beast in chapter 13, one of whose heads had been struck to death but had been healed, 13:3, undoubtedly contains an allusion to a Roman legend, that of Nero redivivus, that is, Nero back to life. The Roman Emperor Nero committed suicide in 67 AD by plunging a dagger into his throat. However, legend had it that he was alive, that he had taken refuge with the Parthians, and that he would return at the head of an army to take revenge on the Roman Senate. Another example, Christ's threat to come like a thief to take the church of Sardis by surprise, letter to Sardis in chapter 3, alludes to the history of the city of Sardis, which on 2 occasions had been taken by night by the enemy because it was not sufficiently on its guard. The reference to these episodes in the history of Sardis, which were not very glorious, but were very well known to the Christians of that city, gives greater impact to the threat of Christ. If we take into account these 3 levels for interpreting the symbols of the book of Revelation, we will be guided towards a correct and not a fanciful interpretation. To conclude on the symbolic language of Revelation, I would now like to address the following question, which many readers of the book are asking. But why on earth is Revelation written in such a way that so few readers understand it? Couldn't it have been written more clearly? This is a legitimate question indeed. In reality, the choice of the apocalyptic genre with its symbolic language offers major advantages that are important to understand if we wish to appreciate Revelation. Let us mention 3 of them. 1. First of all, symbolic language makes it possible to suggest what cannot be represented because it is not of this world. A typical example is the description of heaven in chapter 4. We can certainly speak theologically about heaven, but we can hardly represent it. Catholic theology specifies that the vision of God face to face in heaven will be without any image or for the intellect, which implies that it is strictly impossible to describe the vision of God in an adequate way. Another example is the description of the heavenly Jerusalem in chapters 21 and 22. In both cases, chapter 4 and chapters 21 and 22, symbolic language makes possible to use images to suggest what is properly unspeakable. Behold, a throne was set up in heaven, and one sat on the throne. God is beyond all images, but the Apocalypse suggests its transcendent beauty through luminous symbols. He who sits is like a vision of jasper and carnelian. A rainbow around the throne is like a vision of emerald. 2. Another advantage of using symbolic language is the powerful impact it gives to the message. The Apocalypse is full of powerful images that strike the imagination of readers and even listeners, since it must have been proclaimed initially in Christian churches, probably during the Sunday liturgy. For example, the fantastic description of the trumpet's plagues, chapters 9 and 10 of the book of Revelation, the description of the beast in chapter 13, which appears as a bear, as a lion, as a panther, that of the great prostitute in chapter 17, that of the vintage in chapter 14, with the enormous amount of blood spilled, etc. These images are powerful and have an impact on the reader. The author of Revelation uses them to transform the way readers look at the world by opening it up to the eyes of faith. 3. Finally, a third advantage of using symbolic language is that it allows the creation of networks of images. A single image can evoke multiple passages from the Old Testament simultaneously. For example, the image of the crystal sea, which we see in chapter 4 and 15, evokes the Red Sea, the translucent vault under the throne of God in Exodus 24 and Ezekiel 1, the sea of bronze in Solomon's temple, and perhaps the firmament in Genesis. The lamb alludes to the sacrifice of Isaac, Genesis 22, to the paschal lamb of Exodus 12, to the suffering servant of the fourth poem of the servant, Isaiah 53. Admittedly, it takes time for the reader, especially from a Western culture, to enter into the symbolic language of the book of Revelation and to understand how it works. People are always lost at first, perhaps wondering whether this is an esoteric language. However, some 40 years of studying the book of Revelation have shown me that if you persevere, you will very quickly be rewarded for your efforts. Gradually, becoming able to understand and also to enjoy the book's teaching, you will become able to appreciate its beauty and power. For those of you who wish to delve deeper into the question of symbolic language in the book of Revelation and who can read French, I'd like to mention that I have written a study in French on this topic, symbolic language, which is the first chapter of my book, Chemin à travers l'Apocalypse, the references of which are given in the general bibliography of these conferences. I see you soon for the next conference.